Alrighty, welcome. Uh, so, as I put in the preface of my of this stream, my humblest apologies to my longtime listeners who don't tune in to Wednesdays for obvious reasons. It's not there for most of them. It's not really there for anyone. It's because I would play Warframe occasionally. So the reasons for me doing this are manifold. Let me explain what I'm doing. So, as I've brought up in my last couple free read Fridays, this book, Hyperion by Dan Simmons, has a structure where there's kind of a prelude slash interlude, and then that's usually pretty short, like 20 pages or so, and then like a character story, which is like the main meat of the chapter, uh, which is like 50, 60 odd pages long, usually, give or take. Um, if I were to do this in the pattern that I am accustomed, one chunk every week, and I don't want to interrupt the actual character story segments. So I want those to be all read in one chunk because they will fit in one chunk, and it makes more sense that way. So what I'm doing, in order to make this book actually move, as opposed to take absolutely forever, is the interludes I'm going to be doing on Wednesdays. Yes, this means anybody who actually wants to catch me live has to tune in twice, but it's going to be for a much shorter period of time. These are only like an hour or so. They're not very long, and which works out very well this week because I am honestly knackered. I'm, I'm beat. So a short one is good for me this week, and that way we're able to keep the rhythm of the main reading chunk being on Fridays because I've got that time set aside. Um, so previously on Hyperion by Dan Simmons, we got The Priest's Tale, which is subtitled The Man Who Cried God. Hello, Vladislav9. Thanks for tuning in. Oh, yeah, I should probably mention there are like a zillion covers for Hyperion um, and its sequel. Uh, And this happens to be one of the Japanese covers. It's actually a two-part cover. It extends to the back, so this Friday I'll show the other half. It's kind of baffling, but some of the stuff pictured therein doesn't really make much sense. But it's fine because it looks cool. It's not exactly the highest resolution in the world, so it's a tad blurry, but it's the best I could find. I don't have a Japanese edition of the books. I've never seen a physical copy of the Japanese edition of the books. Sorry. So yeah, last time we had The Priest's Tale, or The Man Who Cried God, which is the story that Lenar Hoyt tells the group. He is part of the now fossilizing or dying off Catholic faith. He's a Catholic priest. And as a youth, he was sent to escort to Hyperion one Father Paul Duray, who did it wasn't well, he did archaeology on a planet called Armagast, which happens to be a labyrinthine world, which Hyperion also is. Therein, we learn that Father Paul Duray basically fudged some of their archaeological findings in order to make the Catholic Church seem relevant again to the universe at large. This backfired because people found out. Either he gave himself up or other people figured out that he was fudging some numbers. So as penance, instead of being excommunicated, he is basically sending himself to Hyperion in order to find this group of people there who are borderline mythical called the Bikura. The Bikura were supposed to be this group of people who are one of the from a drop ship when Hyperion was first being colonized that crashed somewhere in the middle of nowhere and never managed to make contact with anyone ever again except for once. And this one guy just didn't care about them who found them. some adventurer dude. So he goes out. He does wind up finding them, and he winds up finding their dirty, dark secret, which is they are immortal. But at what cost? The cost is that they all have this thing embedded in them called the cruciform, which is some sort of biomechanical whoozy what's it that basically sends little doodads into their brains and throughout their bodies. They can have a limb broken and it'll regenerate. They can die and it will rebuild them, but it rebuilds them less. It rebuilds them simpler. They are described as being pretty similar to either mongoloids or having Down syndrome. Those are the book's words. Um, they're quite dumb in the traditional sense. They're also rather murderous in order to protect the secret of their existence. Not that they're immortal, not because they're immortal, but because, well, there's other reasons. We'll get into those. There are reasons that will be made, if not clear, then at least there will be reasons. Otherwise, it just seems like, well, why is that all happening? But they got these devices attached to them. Oh, I don't think I made sure this wasn't showing Warframe. I thought I did. Nope, I did. I think I fixed it. Cool. Well, if it's saying it's Warframe, then I'm sorry to anyone tuning in expecting Warframe. Normally I do that Wednesdays, but this week and the next several will be a bit different. Anyway, they got these crucifixes, these cruciforms from somewhere in the labyrinths. How long they've been alive is anyone's guess. Presumably 400 years, because they are the 70. There are 70 of them. Anyway, Father Paul de Rey, through a series of misadventures, winds up getting one of these cruciforms put in him. They mistook him as being of the cross because he's a Catholic priest and he wears a cross, which happens to look exactly like or similar enough to one of these cruciforms that's embedded in their flesh. So he winds up getting one implanted in him, and through some trials and travails, basically we learn what it's doing. And then he says, no, I have to escape. Can't let the rest of the universe not know about this. And he does, but every time he tries to escape, the cruciform inflicts massive pain on him. So he has to turn back. So every time he leaves where the Bikura are, he is inflicted with incredible pain. But the cruciform itself does not like pain. So if you inflict enough pain on yourself, you can move on. Or if you use painkillers, it won't be able to do as much to you, but you can make it recede. So his grand plan is that he's going to go out and keep hurting himself until he can get far enough away. This doesn't quite succeed. Lennar Hoyt, the character who's actually with us in the present, I'm putting in air quotes. You can't see the air quotes, but they're there, I promise. This is a hell of a recap, isn't it? Hopefully people aren't tuning into this after the fact, or before watching part 2. Sorry if you are. I'm spoiling an entire segment. It's pretty epic. You should definitely have stopped listening a while ago and gone and checked that out because it's really good. Lennar Hoyt gets dispatched practically by the time he gets back to Pachem, I believe is the name of the Catholic homeworld now, or the Catholic motherworld. Home base, headquarters. It's where the space pope lives. Um, it's their new equivalent of the Vatican City. There have been references to Earth either dying or vanishing or not being used anymore. We will learn a lot more about that later. Something's happened to Earth. We don't know what. I know what. Anybody who's read the book knows what. Y'all don't. You will. This will be explained in detail. Anyway, so not too long after he gets back, they're like, well, it's because of, travel time. It's been however long. And we haven't had contact with Father Paul de Rey in years since he got there. So, we should probably check on that guy. And Lennar Hoyt is like, I volunteer, or gets volunteered. Either way, he gets sent back to Hyperion. And through much trials and tribulations, he winds up finding Lenar Hoyt's, no, sorry, finding Father Paul de Rey's effects, which includes his diary. Um, and that's all great. So he learns, what happened to him and the Bakura and everything. Of course, then it's time for our merry band of 7 adventurers to make their way down, in the present, to make their way down to Hyperion so they can begin their pilgrimage to the Time Tombs, the Shrike pilgrimage. To the Time Tombs, the Sphinx, and some other such things that have only been referenced but haven't really been described yet. We'll get into that. Um, and But Lenar Hoyt is he's lagging behind. So the consul volunteers to check him out. Be like, hey, what's up? The consul has kind of already figured out what's going on, and it turns out Lenar Hoyt uh, did get a hold of all that, but Father Paul de Rey had basically crucified himself on one of these things called Tesla trees, which are trees that make zappy zaps and are really unpleasant to be around. So he was being electrocuted and revived and burned to death and horribly exploded and brought back to life over and over and over for years, like 7, 8 years or something. Um, Fortunately, his diary remained intact. Uh, Also, Lenar Hoyt got cruciformed. Also, he grabbed Paul de Rey's cruciform, so he is double cruciformed. So he's in a little bit of pain because he's been light years away from Hyperion for a while now. So he's injecting himself with Ultramorph, which is morphine on on morphine. It's very, very, very strong painkiller. It's the only way he's able to get through the day. He's basically suffering 24/7 until he gets closer to Hyperion and specifically to the location where the cruciforms want him to be located. Also, the Bakura have been nuked. They got blown up. Whether that actually killed them or not is anybody's guess. Death is tough. Anyway, so that's where we're at. So our gang now are now on their way down to the surface of Hyperion, and we're going to get a an introduction to Keats, actually, one of the cities, as well as named after the poet. Yes, trust me, we'll get into that. Boy, howdy, are we going to get into that? That's going to be good times. So this has been a recap that took about 30 minutes. Sorry, 15 minutes, give or take. It's a long recap. There's a lot to cover. I'm going to probably keep them relatively short. I'll be like, hey, just check out the last one. And we are, yeah, with that, we're going to get cracking with chapter 2. I know, 3 streams in, we're finally on the second chapter. Pretty great. Well, the first stream was a prologue. The second one was the meat, a priest's tale, and then this will be the interlude. Okay, with that, I'm gonna get a quick sip of water here, and we'll get cracking. Either late today or sometime in the next couple days. Worst case this weekend, I will have a playlists. I will finally get the playlist set up so that all the Hyperion stuff is in its appropriate location, which will make this a lot less confusing. I should probably embed hyperlinks or something for previously ons, but I don't actually know how to do that at the beginning of a video where it's like, oh, you should probably see this one before that. There's a way to do that. I don't know how off the top of my head. Anyway, let's get cracking. Chapter 2. It had been a warm, rainy day in Keats, Hyperion's capital, and even after the rain stopped, a layer of clouds moved slow and heavy over the city, filling the air with the salt scent of the ocean 20 kilometers to the west. Toward evening, as the gray daylight was beginning to fade into gray twilight, a double sonic boom shook the town and then echoed from the single sculpted peak to the south. The clouds glowed blue-white. Half a minute later, an ebony spacecraft broke through the overcast and descended carefully on a tail of fusion flame, its navigation lights blinking red and green against the gray. At 1,000 meters, the craft's landing beacons flared, and 3 beams of coherent light from the spaceport north of town locked the ship in a welcoming ruby tripod. The spacecraft hovered at 300 meters, slipped sideways as smoothly as a mug sliding on a wet tabletop, and then settled weightlessly into a waiting blast pit. High-pressure jets of water bathed the pit and the base of the ship, sending up billows of steam to blend with the curtains of drizzle blowing across the paved plain of the spaceport. When the water jets ceased, there was no noise except the whisper of rain and the random ticks and creaks of the cooling spaceship. A balcony extruded itself from the ship's bulkhead 20 meters above the pit wall. 5 figures emerged. "Thank you for the ride, sir," Colonel Cassad said to the consul. The consul nodded and leaned on the railing, taking in deep breaths of fresh air. Droplets of rain beaded on his shoulders and eyebrows. Saul Weintraub lifted his baby from her infant carrier. Some change in pressure, temperature, scent, motion, noise, or a combination of all of these, had awakened her, and now she began to cry lustily. Weintraub bounced her and cooed to her, but the wailing continued. "An appropriate comment upon our arrival," said Martin Silenus. The poet wore a long purple cape and a red beret which slouched to his right shoulder. He took a drink from a wine-glass he had carried out from the lounge. "Christ on a stick, this place looks different." "Christ on a stick, this place looks different." The consul, who had been away only 8 local years, had to agree. The spaceport had been a full 9 clicks from the city when he lived in Keats. Now shacks, tents, and mud streets surrounded the landing field's perimeter. In the consul's day, no more than a ship a week had put in at the tiny spaceport. Now he counted more than 20 spacecraft on the field. The small administration and customs building had been superseded by a huge prefabricated structure. A dozen new blast pits and dropship grids had been added where the field had been hastily extended to the west, and the perimeter now was littered with scores of camouflage-sheathed modules, which the consul knew must serve as everything from ground control stations to barracks. A forest of exotic antennae grew skyward from a cluster of such boxes at the far end of the landing apron. "Progress," murmured the consul. "War," said Colonel Cassad. "Those are people," said Braun Lamia, pointing toward the main terminal gates on the south side of the field. A wave of drab colors crashed like a silent surf against the outer fence and the violet containment field. "My God," said the consul, "you're right." Cassad produced his binoculars, and they took turns staring at the thousands of forms tugging at the wire, pressing against the repelling field. "Why are they here?" asked Lamia. "What do they want?" Even from half a kilometer away, the mindless will of the mob was daunting. Dark forms of Force Marines could be seen patrolling just within the perimeter. The consul realized that between the wire, the containment field, and the Marines, a strip of raw earth almost surely signified mines or a death beam zone, or both. "What do they want?" repeated Lamia. "They want out," said Cassad. Even before the colonel spoke, the consul realized that the shack city around the spaceport and the mob at the gates were inevitable. The people of Hyperion were ready to leave. He guessed that there must be such a silent surge toward the gates each time a ship landed. "Well, there's one'll be staying," said Martin Silenus, and pointed toward the low mountain across the river to the south. "Old weeping William Rex, God rest his sinful soul." The sculpted face of sad King Billy was just visible through the light rain and growing darkness. "I knew him, Horatio," said the drunken poet, "a man of infinite jest, not one of them funny. A real horse's ass, Horatio." Saul Weintraub stood just inside the ship, shielding his baby from the drizzle and removing her cries from the vicinity of the conversation. He pointed. "Someone is coming." A ground car with its camouflage polymer inert and a military EMV modified with hover fans for Hyperion's weak magnetic field were crossing the damp hardpan. Martin Silenus's gaze never left sad King Billy's dour visage. Silenus said in a voice almost too soft to be heard, "Deep in the shady sadness of a vale, far sunken from the healthy breath of morn, far from the fiery noon and eve's one star, sat gray-haired Saturn, quiet as a stone. Still as the silence round about his lair, forest on forest hung above his head, like cloud on cloud." Father Hoyt came onto the balcony, rubbing his face with both hands. His eyes were wide and unfocused, a child rising from his nap. "Are we there?" he asked. "Fucking aye!" cried Martin Silenus, returning the binoculars to the colonel. "Let's go down and greet the gendarmes." The young Marine lieutenant seemed unimpressed with the group even after he had scanned the authorization wafer Het Mastine had passed along from the task force commander. The lieutenant took his time scanning their visa chips, letting them wait in the drizzle, occasionally making a comment with the idle arrogance common to such nobodies who have just come into a small bit of power. Then he came to Fedman Kassad's chip and looked up with the expression of a startled stoat. "Colonel Kassad?" "Retired," said Kassad. "I'm sorry, sir," said the lieutenant, stumbling over his words as he fumbled the visas back to everyone. "I had no idea you were with this party, sir. That is, the captain just said. I mean, my uncle was with you on Brescia, sir. I mean, I'm sorry. Anything me or my men can do to." "At ease, Lieutenant," said Kassad. "Is there any chance of getting some transport to the city?" Uh, well, sir." The young Marine started to rub his chin and then remembered that he was wearing his helmet. "Yes, sir. But the problem is, sir, the mobs can get pretty nasty and, well, the damn EMVs don't work for shit on this. Uh, pardon me, sir. You see, the ground transports are limited to cargo, and we don't have any skimmers free to leave the base until 2200 hours, but I'll be happy to get your party on the roster for—" "Just a minute," said the consul. A battered passenger skimmer with the gold geodesic of the hegemony painted on one flare skirt. Flare skirt? Painted on one flare skirt, had landed 10 meters away. A tall, thin man stepped out. "Theo!" cried the consul. The two men stepped forward, started to shake hands, and then hugged each other instead. "Damn," said the consul. "You look good, Theo." It was true. His former aide had gained half a dozen years on the consul, but the younger man still had the boyish smile, thin face, and thick red hair that had attracted every unmarried woman, and not a few married ones, on the consulate staff. The shyness which had been part of Theo Lane's vulnerability was still there, as evidenced by the way he now needlessly adjusted his archaic, horn-rimmed glasses. The young diplomat's one affectation. "It's good to have you back," said Theo. The consul turned, started to introduce his friend to the group, and then stopped. "My God," he said, "you're consul now. I'm sorry, Theo, I wasn't thinking." Theo Lane smiled and adjusted his glasses. "No problem, sir," he said. Actually, I'm no longer consul. For the last few months, I've been acting Governor General. The Home Rules Council finally requested and received formal colonial status. Welcome to the newest world in the hegemony. The consul stared a second and then hugged his former protege again. Congratulations, Your Excellency. Theo grinned and glanced at the sky. It's going to rain in earnest before long. Why don't we get your group aboard the skimmer and I'll drive you into town? The new Governor General smiled at the young Marine. Lieutenant? Yes, sir? The officer had snapped to attention. Could we get your men to load these good people's luggage, please? We'd all like to get in out of the rain. The skimmer flew south above the highway at a steady 60 meters. The consul rode in the front passenger seat. The rest of the group relaxed in flow foam recliners behind. Martin Silenus and Father Hoyt appeared to be asleep. Weintraub's baby had ceased crying in favor of nursing on a soft bottle of synthesized mother's milk. Things have changed, said the consul. He rested his cheek against the rain-spattered canopy and looked down at the chaos. Thousands of shacks and lean-tos covered the hillsides and gullies along the three-click ride to the suburbs. Fires were being lighted under wet tarps, and the consul watched mud-colored figures moving between mud-colored shacks. High fences had been rigged along the old spaceport highway, and the road itself had been widened and regraded. 2 lanes of truck and hover traffic, most of it military green or shrouded with inactive camouflage polymer, moved sluggishly in both directions. Ahead, the lights of Keats seemed to have multiplied and spread across new sections of the river valley and hills. 3 million, said Theo, as if reading his former boss's mind. At least 3 million people and growing every day. The consul stared. There were only 4.5 million people on the planet when I left. Still are, said the new Governor General. And every one of them wants to get to Keats, board a ship, and get the hell out. Some are waiting for the Farcaster to be built, but most don't believe it'll happen in time. They're afraid. Of the ousters? Them too, said Theo, but mostly of the Shrike. The consul turned his face from the coolness of the canopy. It's come south of the bridle range, then? Theo laughed without humor. It's everywhere. Or they're everywhere. Most people are convinced that there are dozens or hundreds of the things now. Shrike deaths have been reported on all 3 continents. Everywhere except Keats, segments of the coast along the main, and a few of the big cities like Endymion. How many casualties? The consul did not really want to know. At least 20,000 dead or missing, said Theo. There are a lot of injured, but that isn't the Shrike, is it? Again came the dry laugh. The Shrike doesn't just wound people, does it? People shoot each other by accident, fall down stairways, or jump out windows in their panic, and trample each other in crowds. It's a fucking mess. In the 11 years the consul had worked with Theo Lane, he had never heard the younger man use profanity of any sort. Is force any help? The consul asked. Are they what's keeping the Shrike away from the big cities? Theo shook his head. Force hasn't done a damn thing except control the mobs. Oh, the Marines put on a show of keeping the spaceport open here and the harbor landing zone at Port R secure, but they haven't even tried to confront the Shrike. They're waiting to fight the ousters. SDF? Asked the consul, knowing, even as he spoke, that the poorly trained self-defense force would have been of little use. Theo snorted. At least 8,000 of the casualties are SDF. General Braxton took the Fighting Third up the river road to strike at the Shrike menace in their lair, and that was the last we heard of them. You're joking, said the consul, but one look at his friend's face told him that he wasn't. Theo, he said. "How in the world did you have time to meet us at the spaceport?" "I didn't," said the Governor General. He glanced in the back. The others were sleeping or staring exhaustedly out windows. "I needed to talk to you," said Theo. "Convince you not to go." The consul started to shake his head, but Theo grasped his arm, squeezed hard. "Now listen to what I have to say, damn it! I know how hard it is for you to come back here after what happened, but God damn it, there's no sense in your throwing everything away for no reason. Abandon this stupid pilgrimage. Stay in Keats." "I can't," began the consul. "Listen to me," demanded Theo. "Reason one, you're the finest diplomat and crisis manager I've ever seen, and we need your skills." "It doesn't—" "Shut up a minute. Reason two, you and the others won't get within 200 clicks of the time tombs. This isn't like the old days when you were here and the goddamn suicides could get up there and even sit around for a week and maybe even change their minds and come home. The Shrike is on the move. It's like a plague." "I understand that, but—" "Reason three, I need you. I begged Tau Ceti Center to send someone else out. When I found that you were coming, well, hell, it got me through the last 2 years." The consul shook his head, not understanding. Theo started the turn toward the city center, and then hovered, taking his eyes off the controls to look directly at the consul. "I want you to take over the Governor Generalship. The Senate won't interfere, except perhaps for Gladstone, and by the time she finds out, it'll be too late." The consul felt as though someone had struck him below the third rib. He looked away, down at the maze of narrow streets and crooked buildings that was Jacktown, the old city. When he could speak again, he said, "I can't, Theo." "Listen, if you—" "No, I mean I can not. It would be no good if I did accept, but the simple truth is, I can't. I have to go on this pilgrimage." Theo straightened his glasses, stared straight ahead. "Look, Theo, you're the most competent and capable Foreign Service professional I've ever worked with. I've been out of things for 8 years. I think—" Theo nodded tersely, interrupted. "I suppose you want to go to the Shrike Temple?" "Yes." The skimmer circled and settled. The consul was staring at nothing, thinking, when the side doors of the skimmer raised and folded, and Saul Weintraub said, "Good God." The group stepped out and stared at the charred and toppled wreckage of what had been the Shrike Temple. Since the time tombs had been closed as too dangerous some 25 local years earlier, the Shrike Temple had become Hyperion's most popular tourist attraction. Filling 3 full city blocks, rising more than 150 meters to its central, sharpened spire, the Shrike Church's central temple was part awe-inspiring cathedral, part Gothic joke with its fluid, buttressed curves of stone, permabonded to its whiskered alloy skeleton. Part Escher print with its tricks of perspective and impossible angles, part Boschian nightmare with its tunnel entrances, hidden chambers, dark gardens, and forbidden sections, and, more than anything else, it had been part of Hyperion's past. Now it was gone. Tall heaps of blackened stone were the only hint of the structure's former majesty. Melted alloy girders rose from the stones like the ribs of some giant carcass. Much of the rubble had tumbled into the pits, basements, and passages which had lain beneath the 3-century-old landmark. The consul walked close to the edge of a pit and wondered if the deep basements had, as legend decreed, actually connected to one of the planet's labyrinths. "It looks as if they used a hell whip on this place," said Martin Silenus, using an archaic term for any high-energy laser weapon. The poet seemed suddenly sobered as he joined the consul at the edge of the pit. "I remember when the temple and parts of the old city were the only things here," he said. "After the disaster near the tombs, Billy decided to relocate Jacktown here because of the temple. Now it's gone. Christ." "No," said Cassad. The others looked at him. The colonel rose from where he had been examining the rubble. Not a hell whip, he said. Shaped plasma charges, several of them. Now do you want to stay here and go on this useless pilgrimage? Asked Theo. Come with me back to the consulate. He was speaking to the consul, but extending the invitation to everyone. The consul turned away from the pit, looking at his former aide, but now seeing, for the first time, the governor-general of a besieged hegemony world. We can't, Your Excellency, said the consul. At least, I can't. I won't speak for the others. The four men and the woman shook their heads. Silenus and Cassad began unloading luggage. The rain returned as a light mist falling out of the darkness. At that second, the consul noticed the two force attack skimmers hovering above nearby rooftops. Darkness and chameleon polymer hulls had hidden them well, but the rain now revealed their outlines. Of course, thought the consul, the governor-general does not travel unescorted. Did the priests escape? Were there survivors when the temple was destroyed? Asked Braun Lamia. Yes, said Theo. The de facto dictator of 5 million doomed souls removed his glasses and dried them on his shirt tail. All of the Shrike's Shrike cult's priests... Oh, geez, let's try that sentence again, my bad. All of the Shrike cult priests and acolytes escaped through tunnels. The mob had been surrounding this place for months. Their leader, a woman named Kamen from somewhere east of the Sea of Grass, gave everyone in the temple plenty of warning before they set off the DL-20. Where were the police? Asked the consul. The SDF? Force? Theo Lane smiled, and at that second he looked decades older than the young man the consul had known. You folks have been in transit for 3 years, he said. The universe has changed. Shrike cultists are being burned out and beaten up in the web. You can imagine the attitude here. The Keats police have been absorbed under the martial law I declared 14 months ago. They and the SDF watched while the mob torched the temple. So did I. There were 500,000 people here tonight. Saul Weintraub stepped closer. Do they know about us? About this final pilgrimage? If they did, said Theo, none of you would be alive. You'd think they'd welcome anything that might appease the Shrike, but the only thing the mob would notice is that you were chosen by the Shrike Church. As it was, I had to overrule my own advisory council. They were in favor of destroying your ship before it reached the atmosphere. Why did you? Asked the consul. Overrule them, I mean. Theo sighed and adjusted his glasses. Hyperion still needs the hegemony, and Gladstone still has the vote of confidence of the All-Thing, if not the Senate. And I still need you. The consul looked at the rubble of the Shrike temple. This pilgrimage was over before you got here, said Governor-General Theo Lane. Will you come back to the consulate with me, at least in an advisory capacity? I'm sorry, said the consul. I can't. Theo turned without a word, dropped into the skimmer, and lifted off. His military escort followed as a blur in the rain. It was raining harder now. The group moved closer together in the growing darkness. Weintraub had rigged a makeshift hood over Rachel, and the noise of the rain on plastic made the baby cry. What now? Said the consul, looking around at the night and narrow streets. Their luggage lay heaped in a soggy pile. The world smelled of ashes. Martin Silenus grinned. I know a bar. It turned out that the consul also knew the bar. He had all but lived in Cicero's for most of his 11-year assignment on Hyperion. Unlike most things in Keats, on Hyperion, Cicero's was not named after some piece of pre-Hegira literary trivia. Rumor had it that the bar was named after a section of an old Earth city. Some said Chicago, USA, others were sure it was Calcutta, AIS. But only Stan Lueski, owner and great-grandson of the founder, knew for sure, and Stan had never revealed its secret. The bar itself had overflowed over the century and a half of its existence. Let's try that sentence again. The bar itself had overflowed over the century and a half of its existence from a walk-up loft in one of Jacktown's sagging older buildings along the Hooghly River to 9 levels in 4 sagging old buildings along the Hooghly. The only consistent elements of decor at Cicero's over the decades were the low ceilings, thick smoke, and constant background babble, which offered a sense of privacy in the midst of bustle. There was no privacy this night. The consul and the others paused as they carried their gear through the Marsh Lane entrance. "Jesus wept," muttered Martin Silenus. Cicero's looked as if it had been invaded by barbarian hordes. Every chair was filled, every table occupied, mostly by men, and the floors were littered with packs, weapons, bedrolls, antiquated comm equipment, ration boxes, and all of the other detritus of an army of refugees. Or perhaps a refugee army. The heavy air of Cicero's, which once had been filled with a blended scent of broiling steaks, wine, stim, ale, and tea-free tobacco, was now laden with the overlapping smells of unwashed bodies, urine, and hopelessness. At that moment the huge form of Stan Lueski materialized out of the gloom. The bar owner's forearms were as huge and heavy as ever, but his forehead had advanced more than a few centimeters against the receding tangle of black hair, and there were more creases than the consul remembered around the dark eyes. Those eyes were wide now as Lueski stared at the consul. "Ghost!" he said. "No." "You are not dead?" "No." "By damn!" declared Stan Lueski, and, grasping the consul by the upper arms, picked him up as easily as a man would lift a 5-year-old. "By damn, you are not dead! What are you doing here?" "Checking your liquor license," said the consul. "Put me down." Lueski carefully set the consul down, tapped his shoulders, and grinned. He looked at Martin Silenus, and the grin changed to a frown. "You look familiar, but I have never seen you before." "I knew your great-grandfather," said Silenus. "Which reminds me, do you have any of that pre-Hegira ale left? The warm British stuff that tastes like recycled moose piss. I could never get enough of that." "Nothing left," said Lueski. He pointed at the poet. "By damn! Grandfather Jerry's trunk! That old hollow of the satyr in the original Jacktown! Can it be?" He stared at Silenus and then at the consul, touching them both gingerly with a massive forefinger. "2 ghosts!" "6 tired people," said the consul. The baby began crying again. 7. Do you have space for us?" Lueski turned in a half circle, hands spread, palms up. "It is all like this. No space left. No food. No wine." He squinted at Martin Silenus. "No ale. Now we have become a big hotel with no beds. The SDF bastards stay here without paying and drink their own up-country rotgut and wait for the world to end. That will happen soon enough, I think." The group was standing in what had once been the entrance mezzanine. Their heaped luggage joined a riot of gear, already littering the floor. Small clusters of men shouldered their way through the throng and cast appraising glances at the newcomers, especially at Braun Lamia. She returned their stares with a flat, cold glare. Stan Lueski looked at the consul for a moment. "I have a balcony table. 5 of those SDF death commandos have been parked there for a week, telling everyone and each other how they are going to wipe out the Auster legions with their bare hands. You want the table? I will throw the teat suckers out." "Yes," said the consul. Lueski had turned to leave when Lamia stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Would you like a little help?" she asked. Stan Lueski shrugged, grinned. "I do not need it, but I might like it. Come." They disappeared into the crowd. The third-floor balcony had just enough room for the splintered table and 6 chairs. Despite the insane crowding on the main floors, stairs, and landings, no one had challenged them for the space after Lueski and Lamia threw the protesting death commandos over the railing and into the river 9 meters below. Somehow, Lueski had managed to send up a tankard of beer and a basket of bread and cold beef. The group ate in silence, obviously suffering more than the usual amount of post-fugue hunger, fatigue, and depression. The darkness of the balcony was relieved only by dim, reflected light from deeper within Cicero's, and by the lanterns on passing river barges. Most of the buildings along the Hooghly were dark, but other city lights reflected from low clouds. The consul could make out the ruins of the Shrike Temple half a kilometer upriver. "Well," said Father Hoyt, obviously recovered from the heavy dose of ultramorph and teetering on the delicate balance between pain and sedation. "What do we do next?" When no one answered, the consul closed his eyes. He refused to take the lead in anything. Sitting on the balcony at Cicero's, it was all too easy to fall back into the rhythms of a former life. He would drink until the early morning hours, watch the pre-dawn meteor showers as the clouds cleared, and then stagger to his empty apartment near the market, going into the consulate 4 hours later, showered, shaved, and seemingly human, except for the blood in his eyes and the insane ache in his skull. Trusting in Theo, quiet, efficient Theo, to get him through the morning. Trusting in luck to get him through the day. Trusting in the drinking at Cicero's to get him through the night. Trusting in the unimportance of his posting to get him through life. "You are all ready to leave for the pilgrimage?" Oh, sorry. "You are all ready to leave for the pilgrimage?" The consul's eyes snapped open. A hooded figure stood in the doorway, and for a second the consul thought it was Het Mastine, but then he realized that this man was much shorter, and his voice not accented with the stilted Templar consonants. "If you are ready, we must go," said the dark figure. "Who are you?" asked Braun Lamia. "Come quickly," was the shadow's only reply. Fedman Kassad stood, bending to keep his head from striking the ceiling, and detained the robed figure, flipping back the man's hood with a flick of his left hand. "An android!" said Lenar Hoyt, staring at the man's blue skin and blue-on-blue eyes. The consul was less surprised. For more than a century it had been illegal to own androids in the hegemony, and none have been biofactured for almost that long, but they were still used for manual labor in remote parts of backwater, non-colony worlds. Worlds like Hyperion. The Shrike Temple had used androids extensively, complying with the Church of the Shrike doctrine, which proclaimed that androids were free from original sin, therefore spiritually superior to humankind, and, incidentally, exempt from the Shrike's terrible and inevitable retribution. "You must come quickly," whispered the android, setting his hood in place. "Are you from the temple?" asked Lamia. "Quiet!" snapped the android. He glanced into the hall, turned back, and nodded. "We must hurry. Please follow me." All of them stood and then hesitated. The consul watched as Kassad casually unsealed the long leather jacket he was wearing. He caught the briefest glimpse of a death wand tucked in the colonel's belt. Normally, the consul would have been appalled by even the thought of a death wand nearby. The slightest mistaken touch could puree every synapse on the balcony. But at this moment he was oddly reassured by the sight of it. "Our luggage," began Weintraub. "It has been seen to," whispered the hooded man. "Quickly now!" The group followed the android down the stairs and into the night, their movement as tired and passive as a sigh. The consul slept late. Half an hour after sunrise, a rectangle of light found its way between the porthole's shutters and fell across his pillow. The consul rolled away and did not wake. An hour after that there came a loud clatter as the tired mantas which had pulled the barge all night were released and fresh ones harnessed. The consul slept on. In the next hour the footsteps and cries of the crew on the deck outside his stateroom grew louder and more persistent, but it was the warning klaxon below the locks at Carla which finally brought him up out of his sleep. Moving slowly in the drug-like languor of fugue hangover, the consul bathed as best as he could with only basin and pump, dressed in loose cotton trousers, an old canvas shirt, and foam-soled walking shoes, and found his way to the mid-deck. Breakfast had been set out on a long sideboard near a weathered table, which could be retracted into the deck the deck planking. An awning shaded the eating area, and the crimson and gold canvas snapped to the breeze of their passage. It was a beautiful day, cloudless and bright, with Hyperion's sun making up in ferocity what it lacked in size. M. Weintraub, Lamia, Cassad, and Silenus had been up for some time. Lenar Hoyt and Het Mastine joined the group a few minutes after the consul arrived. The consul helped himself to toasted fish, fruit, and orange juice at the buffet, and then moved along to the railing. The water was wide here, at least a kilometer from shore to shore, and its green and lapis sheen echoed the sky. At first glance, the consul did not recognize the land on either side of the river. To the east, periscope bean patties, there we go. They're patties of periscope beans. Something about that is very delightful to say. To the east, periscope bean patties stretched away into the haze of distance, where the rising sun reflected on 1,000 flooded surfaces. A few indigene huts were visible at a junction of paddy dikes, their angled walls made of bleached weirwood or golden half-oak. To the west, the bottom land along the river was overgrown with low tangles of gisson, woman-grove root, and a flamboyant red fern the consul did not recognize, all growing around mud marshes and miniature lagoons, which stretched another kilometer or so to bluffs where scrub everblues clung to any bare spot between granite slabs. For a second the consul felt lost, disoriented on a world he thought he knew well. But then he remembered the klaxon at the Carla locks, and realized that they had entered a rarely used stretch of the Hooghly north of Doukhobor's corpse. The consul had never seen this part of the river, having always traveled on or flown above the Royal Transport Canal which lay to the west of the bluffs. He could only surmise that some danger or disturbance along the main route to the Sea of Grass had sent them this way, back along bypassed stretches of the Hooghly. Had sent them this back way along bypassed stretches of the Hooghly. There we go. Sorry about that. He guessed that they were about 180 kilometers northwest of Keats. "It looks different in the daylight, doesn't it?" said Father Hoyt. The consul looked at the shore again, not sure what Hoyt was talking about. Then he realized the priest meant the barge. It had been strange, following the android messenger in the rain, boarding the old barge, making their way through its maze of tessellated rooms and passages, picking up Het Mastine at the ruins of the temple, and then watching the lights of Keats fall astern. The consul remembered those hours before and after midnight as from a fatigue-blurred dream, and he imagined the others must have been just as exhausted and disoriented. He vaguely remembered his surprise that the barge's crew were all android, but mostly he recalled his relief at finally closing the door of his stateroom and crawling into bed. "I was talking to A. Beddock this morning,"
said Weintraub, referring to the android who had been their guide. "This old scow is quite a history." Martin Silenus moved to the sideboard to pour himself more tomato juice, added a dash of something from the flask he carried, and said, "It's obviously been around a bit. The goddamn railings have been oiled by hands, the stairs worn by feet, the ceilings darkened by lamp soot, and the beds beaten saggy by generations of humping. I'd say it's several centuries old. The carvings and rococo finishes are fucking marvelous. Did you notice that under all the other scents, the inlaid wood still smells of sandalwood? I wouldn't be surprised if this thing came from old Earth." "It does," said Saul Weintraub. The baby, Rachel, slept on his arm, softly blowing bubbles of saliva in her sleep. "We're on the proud ship Benares, built in and named after the old Earth city of the same name." "I don't remember hearing of any old Earth city with that name," said the consul. Braun Lamia looked up from the last of her breakfast. "Benares, also known as Varanasi or Gandipur, Hindu Free State, part of the Second Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere after the Third Sino-Japanese War, destroyed in the Indo-Soviet Muslim Republic Limited Exchange." "Yes," said Weintraub, "the Benares was built quite some time before the big mistake. Mid-22nd century, I would guess. A Betic informs me that it was originally a levitation barge." "Are the EM generators still down there?" interrupted Colonel Cassad. "I believe so," said Weintraub. "Next to the main salon on the lowest deck. The floor of the salon is clear lunar crystal. Quite nice if we were cruising at 2,000 meters. Quite useless now."
Benares, mused. Or Benares. I don't actually know how to pronounce that. I'm sorry. Um, Benares. Benares, Benares, Benares. I'm not really sure. So I'm going to go with Benares. Benares, mused Martin Silenus. He ran his hand lovingly across a time-darkened railing. "I was robbed there once." Braun Lamia put down her coffee mug. "Old man, are you trying to tell us that you're ancient enough to remember old Earth? We're not fools, you know." "My dear child," beamed Martin Silenus, "I am not trying to tell you anything. I just thought it might be entertaining, as well as edifying and enlightening, if at some point we exchanged lists of all the locations at which we have either robbed or been robbed. Since you have the unfair advantage of having been the daughter of a senator, I am sure that your list would be much more distinguished and much longer."
Lamia opened her mouth to retort, frowned, and said nothing.
"I wonder how this ship got to Hyperion," murmured Father Hoyt. "Why bring a levitation barge to a world where EM equipment doesn't work?"
"It would work," said Colonel Cassad. "Hyperion has some magnetic field. It just would not be reliable in holding anything airborne." Father Hoyt raised an eyebrow, obviously at a loss to see the distinction.
"Hey!" cried the poet from his place at the railing. "The gang's all here!"
"So?" said Braun Lamia. Her lips all but disappeared into a thin line whenever she spoke to Silenus.
"So we're all here," he said. "Let's get on with the storytelling."
Het Mastine said, "I thought it had been agreed that we would tell our respective stories after dinner hour."
Martin Silenus shrugged. "Breakfast, dinner, who the fuck cares? We're assembled. It's not going to take 6 or 7 days to get to the time tombs, is it?"
The consul considered. Less than 2 days to get as far as the river. Less than 2 days to get as far as the river could take them. 2 more days, or less, if the winds were right, on the Sea of Grass. Certainly no more than 1 more day to cross the mountains. "No," he said, "not quite 6 days." All right, said Silenus. Then let's get on with the telling of tales. Besides, there's no guarantee that the Shrike won't come calling before we knock on his door. If these bedtime stories are supposed to be helpful to our survival chances in some way, then I say let's hear from everyone before the contributors are start. Let's take the sentence from the top. I'm sorry. Let's take the paragraph from the top. All right, said Silenus. Then let's get on with the telling of tales. Besides, there's no guarantee that the Shrike won't come calling before we knock on his door. If these bedtime stories are supposed to be helpful to our survival chances in some way, then I say let's hear from everyone before the contributors start getting chopped and diced by that ambulatory food processor we're so eager to visit.
You're disgusting, said Braun Lamia.
Ah, darling, smiled Silenus, those are the same words you whispered last night after your second orgasm.
Lamia looked away. Father Hoyt cleared his throat and said, Whose turn is it to tell a story, I mean? The silence stretched. Mine, said Fedman Cassad. The tall man reached into the pocket of his white tunic and held up a slip of paper with a large 2 scribbled on it.
Do you mind doing this now?
Asked Saul Weintraub. Cassad showed a hint of a smile.
I wasn't in favor of doing it at all, he said, but if it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly.
Hey, cried Martin Silenus, this man knows his pre-hedger of playwrights.
Shakespeare? Said Father Hoyt.
No, said Silenus. Lerner and fucking Lowe. Neil Bugger and Simon. Hamill fucking Poston.
Colonel, Saul Weintraub said formally,
the weather is nice, none of us seems to have anything pressing to do in the next hour or so, and we would be obliged if you were to share the tale of what brings you to Hyperion on the Shrike's last pilgrimage.
Cassad nodded. The day grew warmer as the canvas awning snapped, the decks creaked, and the levitation barge Benares worked its steady way upstream toward the mountains, the moors, and the Shrike. And with that, we will call it. We will continue with The Soldier's Tale, The War Lovers, which will be this Friday, which is another moderately beefy one. Geez Louise. And the short one after that is exceptionally short as well. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to manage that one. But we'll do how we be doing. We've got a pattern. Alrighty, yeah. So definitely something to look forward to there. Okay. This particular story segment I think is a little shorter than the last one. Um, it's going to be a while before the story segments start really feeling like they're blending together and it's not just introducing new wild things. They are going to keep introducing new wild things, but you're going to start noticing commonalities. It's a tapestry we weave that Dan Simmons wove, and it is a pretty impressive tapestry. It's definitely one of my favorite. I guess you can call it a space opera in a way. Um, Definitely has a grand dramatic tradition going for it. It's quite a thing. It's never really been equaled. There have been imitators. I am looking squarely at you, Peter F. Hamilton. He's tried. Particularly, he apes Endymion. A lot of things from Endymion he took notes on and directly incorporated in a couple of his books. To the point where I'm like, man, you better hope nobody comes after you for plagiarism, because man, that's pretty close. but it's a different context, so it's fine probably, right? Right. Anyway, and if you know what I'm talking about, you know. If you don't know, well, we might get there. So anyway, with that, I'm going to call it good there. And yeah, join me. I do these live every now Monday, Wednesday, Friday are my stream days. Mondays are Mecha Mondays, where I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent. Normally it's been video games, but now it's going to be some book reading for at least the next year. I've got plenty of mecha literature to bang through. That's what we'll be starting on New Year's, actually. I believe it syncs up with, yes, it will be New Year's Day that day, at least by the old ADBC calendar. Gregorian. uh, Wednesdays now for the foreseeable are going to be Wordy Wednesdays, where I do either an interlude for Hyperion, or I'll do if one of those isn't convenient, then I'll do like short stories or something. It's a float day. You never know what you're gonna get. Wednesdays are my do whatever day, and then Fridays are free read Fridays, where we do the bulk of our narrative reading. I would like to add here that anytime if anyone has anything they want read, please post it in the comments. I'm always taking suggestions until I have like a Patreon or something up that people can put it there on. I don't have like a dedicated social media place. Technically, I have a Facebook page. I haven't looked at it in years, and I don't plan on starting. Technically, I don't actually have a Twitter account. No, I don't. I don't think I ever did. Have no need, just no need for it. Um, I don't really do much of the social media thing. I might get like a Discord server or something cobbled together so people can hop onto that, even though that requires going through hoops to do the Discord thing. Mostly because that would be easy for me to moderate and keep an eye on. But yeah, so that's for the foreseeable. After the Hyperion cantos, which comprises Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion by Dan Simmons. Then we will coin toss and do either Destination Void, which I just did a reread through for my own sanity so I can remember how it goes. I forgot how wild that was. Or The Three Body Problem by Cixin Liu. Destination Void is by Frank Herbert. You may recognize him. You probably have never heard of him or any of the things he's done. Something involving like a cat litter box or beach activities. I don't remember. Something like that. Definitely wasn't an entire allegory for a whole lot of things, actually. Dune covers a lot. So yeah. So yeah. That's the plan going forward, and that's like the Hyperion cantos are going to take us a while to get through. That's going to be months plural. It's there's no way around it. Um, it's just going to take a while, but that's fine. Um, yeah. So that's the game plan. I start streaming at usually about noon Eastern Standard Time, or daily time, whenever the solstice decides to do whatever it's doing. Um, East Coast U.S. time. There we go. Whatever it happens to be at that point. So if you want to catch me live, feel free. I do these all live, and they are raw and uncut as a result, which, there's pros and cons. Anyway, with that, sorry my energy level wasn't as high today. Hopefully that will be amended by Friday. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. Thanks so much, and have a good one. Bye. See y'all next time.